The arrogance of the Empire. The Xyrrak Dominion, a galactic empire spanning hundreds of star systems, had conquered countless worlds with ease. Their war doctrine was built on technological supremacy: energy weapons, plasma shields, grav-tanks, and orbital strikes. Against such power, primitive species crumbled without resistance. When they set their sights on Earth, they expected no different. Humanity was a backwater civilization, barely capable of space travel. Their armies relied on crude, chemical-based firearms and slow, fuel-burning vehicles. The Dominion's War Council scoffed at the very idea of Earth resisting. Stone Age primates with metal toys. High Lord Xalvok sneered as he reviewed intelligence reports. They still fire slugs. Their war machines roll on wheels. This will be a massacre. The invasion began with overwhelming force. Orbital bombardments reduced military bases to rubble before human forces could mount a defense. Xyrrak war walkers, towering machines bristling with plasma cannons, marched through city streets unchallenged. Their grav-tanks, floating above the ground with eerie silence, melted steel and concrete with each blast of their weapons. The first clashes. In the streets of New York, London, and Beijing, human soldiers fought with everything they had. Machine guns spat lead at advancing Xyrrak infantry, but their energy shields absorbed the bullets effortlessly. Rocket launchers were fired in desperation, only to see their projectiles detonated mid-air by Xyrrak point defense systems. One soldier, Private Andrew Reynolds, took cover behind a burning Humvee as a squad of Xyrrak warriors advanced. His rifle rattled as he emptied his magazine into them, but the rounds bounced off their shields. The aliens simply raised their plasma rifles and fired. Blue-hot bolts of energy struck Reynolds' comrades, vaporizing flesh and bone instantly. The battle was one-sided. Within days, entire divisions were wiped out, their modern tactics and weapons useless against an enemy that had mastered energy warfare for millennia. The Dominion broadcast its victories across Earth's networks. Xyrrak commanders laughed as they paraded captured human soldiers, mocking their outdated weapons. "You fight with sticks and stones," one alien general declared. "You are nothing before us." Human leaders scrambled for solutions. Nuclear weapons were considered, but the Xyrrak's orbital superiority made launching them impossible. The world's most advanced fighter jets were swatted from the sky by anti-air plasma turrets before they could engage. There was no plan, no way to fight back. The desperate search for a solution. Deep in an underground bunker, General William Carter sat in silence as his advisors argued. They spoke of surrender, evacuation, and last stands. None of it mattered if humanity lacked a weapon that could pierce the enemy's shields. Then an old voice spoke up. "We still have the tanks." The room went silent as all eyes turned to Colonel Robert Tanner, a grizzled veteran of past wars. "Tanks," one officer scoffed. "You saw what happened to the Bradleys and Strykers. They got melted before they could even fire." Tanner shook his head. "Not those. I mean the M1 Abrams." A murmur spread through the room. The Abrams was a legend, a main battle tank that had dominated Earth's battlefields for decades. Its 120mm smoothbore cannon could turn steel into scrap, and its reactive armor had withstood anti-tank missiles in countless wars. But against a foe that wielded energy weapons and shields, it seemed ridiculous. Carter leaned forward. "You think it can make a difference?" Tanner nodded. "I don't think. I know." The general turned to his staff. "Give me a list of every operational Abrams left in storage. We're bringing them back." As the meeting ended, hope flickered in their eyes. The world had called the Abrams a relic, but soon it would become humanity's greatest weapon. The return of the Iron Beast. The underground bunker rumbled as engineers and mechanics rushed to bring the M1 Abrams tanks back to life. Dust-covered hulls, some marked for decommissioning, sat in rows like forgotten relics. For years, these tanks had been considered outdated, relics of a past era where wars were fought with steel and fire rather than energy weapons and orbital strikes. But now, humanity was out of options. General William Carter stood with his arms crossed as he watched the crews work. Sparks flew as welders reinforced the tank's armor. Engineers replaced old electronic systems with shielded wiring to resist electromagnetic pulses. Soldiers loaded depleted uranium shells, their dense cores promising to punch through anything the aliens had. "How many can we get operational?" Carter asked. 38, sir," replied Colonel Robert Tanner. His face hardened with determination. "And we've got experienced crews ready to roll." Carter nodded. It wasn't much, but it was something, and it had to be enough. The first rollout. In the dim morning light, the first M1 Abrams battalion roared to life. Diesel engines rumbled, sending vibrations through the ground. The smell of fuel and steel filled the air, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile hum of the Xyrrak's grav-tanks. Sergeant David Jackson climbed onto his tank, iron fist, and adjusted his helmet. He had fought in wars before, but never against something like this. His loader, Corporal Mills, patted the side of the tank. "Think this old girl's got what it takes?" Jackson smirked. "We're about to find out." As the tanks rolled out of the bunker, soldiers cheered for the first time since the war began. The sight of the Abrams, tanks that had won wars for decades, rekindled hope in the hearts of the battered defenders. But hope meant nothing without victory. The ambush at Devil's Ridge. Recon drones had spotted a Xyrrak battalion advancing through the ruins of Devil's Ridge, a key supply route that led to one of humanity's last military bases. If the aliens secured it, the resistance would collapse. Carter saw an opportunity. This was where they would strike. The Abrams battalion moved into position, concealing themselves in the shattered remains of buildings and behind rocky outcrops. Their engines idled silently, waiting for the perfect moment. Then, the enemy appeared. A column of Xyrrak war machines, their sleek designs glowing with plasma energy, hovered effortlessly over the cracked pavement. Alien soldiers, clad in shimmering armor, marched alongside them in perfect formation. At the head of the column was a Xyrrak grav-tank, a menacing vehicle armed with plasma turrets and deflector shields, the same technology that had rendered Earth's weapons useless. Inside his tank, Jackson adjusted his sights, his crosshairs locking onto the grav-tank. His finger hovered over the trigger. Then, General Carter's voice crackled over the radio. "Fire." Jackson squeezed the trigger. The 120mm depleted uranium shell erupted from the Abrams cannon, cutting through the morning mist with a deafening roar. It slammed into the Xyrrak grav-tank shield, causing a violent explosion of blue energy. The shield flickered and collapsed. A second shell followed a heartbeat later, this time punching through the grav-tank's armor. The alien vehicle erupted in flames, its sleek frame reduced to molten scrap. For the first time in the war, a human weapon had destroyed a Xyrrak tank. The silence that followed was brief. "Open fire," Carter ordered. The Abrams battalion roared to life, their cannons thundering as they unleashed hell. Xyrrak soldiers scrambled in confusion. Plasma bolts splashed harmlessly off the Abrams reactive armor, while the tanks rolled forward with unstoppable force. The coaxial machine guns spat streams of bullets, cutting down alien infantry who had never before faced such a relentless assault. A Xyrrak walker, towering over the battlefield, attempted to retaliate, its energy cannons charging. Jackson's gunner adjusted his aim, firing heat round. The shell struck the walker's leg joint, blowing it apart in a shower of molten metal. The massive machine collapsed, crushing Xyrrak soldiers beneath it. Panic rippled through the alien ranks. They had never encountered an enemy that could shrug off their weapons and strike back with overwhelming firepower. Their commanders screamed in their guttural language, trying to reorganize their forces. But it was too late. A victory that changed the war. Minutes later, the Xyrrak broke formation and retreated, something they had never done before. The mighty Dominion, which had conquered countless worlds without resistance, had just been forced to flee by human tanks. Jackson climbed out of his Abrams and surveyed the battlefield. Wrecked Xyrrak vehicles burned in the distance, their alien technology useless against Earth's old war machines. Corporal Mills whistled. Looks like the brass was wrong. Turns out we didn't need lasers after all. Jackson smirked. Yeah, we just needed a little good old-fashioned American steel. Back at HQ, Carter listened to the battle reports with grim satisfaction. The M1 Abrams had proven its worth. But this was only the beginning. The Xyrrak would come back, stronger, angrier, and more determined than ever. And humanity would be ready. The Empire strikes back and fails. The news of the Xyrrak retreat at Devil's Ridge sent shockwaves through both human and alien forces. For the first time in their history, the Xyrrak Dominion had been forced to withdraw, not by superior technology or advanced strategy, but by a so-called primitive human machine. High Lord Xalvox sat in his command chamber aboard the orbital dreadnought Zarathos, his clawed hands tightening into fists as he reviewed battle footage. He watched in disbelief as human tanks shredded through elite Xyrrak forces, their ancient ballistic weapons cutting down his warriors like wheat before a scythe. This cannot be possible, he growled. A Xyrrak war advisor hesitated before speaking. Their projectile weapons, they are far denser than we anticipated. And their armor, crude but resistant to our plasma. We underestimated them, my lord. Xalvox's slitted eyes burned with fury. Then we will correct that mistake. The Xyrrak had assumed that Earth would fall in days. Now, they prepared for total war. The counterattack begins. The retaliation came swiftly. Xyrrak war fleets descended across Earth, deploying even greater numbers of troops, warwalkers, and newly reinforced grav-tanks with enhanced shields designed to counter human ballistics. They aimed to crush the Abrams battalion, to erase the humiliation they had suffered. Their target, Yellowstone Pass, a critical supply route where intelligence indicated the human tanks were regrouping. If the Xyrrak could wipe out the Abrams battalion, they would break Earth's morale and restore their dominance. But humanity was ready. The Battle of Yellowstone Pass. The M1 Abrams battalion, now bolstered with additional tanks and anti-air support, had taken defensive positions in the narrow, mountainous pass. Their crews had been studying Xyrrak tactics, adjusting their strategies to counter plasma fire and grav-tank maneuvers. Sergeant David Jackson wiped sweat from his brow inside his tank, iron fist, watching through his periscope as Xyrrak forces advanced. Thousands of alien infantry marched forward in disciplined formations, their plasma rifles glowing ominously. Behind them, new-model grav-tanks hovered just above the ground, their reinforced shields shimmering in the morning light. Jackson took a deep breath. Here they come. Over the radio, General Carter's voice came through. Hold your fire. Let them get closer. The Xyrrak forces advanced with unshakable confidence, certain that their upgraded defenses would render the Abrams weapons useless this time. Then Carter gave the order. All tanks, fire at will. The 120mm cannons roared, sending depleted uranium shells streaking toward the alien invaders. The first volley hit the frontline grav-tanks, and for a moment, the Xyrrak commanders smirked, watching as their shields absorbed the impacts. But the humans had learned. A second volley followed immediately, targeting the same weakened shield points. The shimmering defenses collapsed, and the third volley punched through armor like a hot knife through butter. Explosions rocked the battlefield as Xyrrak grav-tanks erupted into fireballs, sending debris raining down upon their own troops. Panic spread through the alien ranks. Advance! Crush them! Xyrrak commanders barked, ordering their walkers to push forward. The massive war walkers, towering like mechanized gods, fired plasma barges, forcing human forces to take cover. One blast hit an Abrams, melting its turret and setting it ablaze. But the humans held the line. Missile teams, hidden in the cliffs, launched javelins at the towering walkers, striking their knee joints. One walker collapsed with a deafening crash, crushing its own troops beneath it. Jackson lined up another shot, targeting another grav-tank. Fire! His gunner squeezed the trigger. The heat round screamed through the air, striking a command vehicle at the heart of the Xyrrak formation. The tank detonated in a violent chain reaction, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. Within minutes, the Xyrrak formations crumbled. What was once a proud and unstoppable war machine of the Dominion now lay in flames, its soldiers scattered, its commanders desperate. The first true defeat of the Xyrrak. The remaining alien forces began to retreat, their once confident warriors now scrambling in fear. Sergeant Jackson climbed out of his tank, standing atop its turret as he watched the mighty Xyrrak Dominion flee before human steel and firepower. Corporal Mills laughed, shaking his head. They said this war was already over. Jackson smirked, loading another shell. Yeah, but they didn't count on the Abrams. The turning point of the war. For the first time, humanity had done more than just survive. They had won. The Xyrrak Dominion, an empire that had conquered worlds for centuries, had just suffered its first true battlefield defeat. Not at the hands of superior technology, but from a machine they had laughed at, a relic of a so-called primitive species. Word spread across Xyrrak fleets. Morale shattered. The once unquestioned dominance of the Dominion was now in doubt. And back on Earth, General Carter stood over a holographic map, his eyes locked on the Xyrrak homeworld. Now, he murmured, we take the fight to them. The hunt begins. The Xyrrak Dominion, an empire that had once ruled with absolute certainty, was now on the defensive. The defeat at Yellowstone Pass had shattered their confidence, and for the first time, the war had shifted in humanity's favor. Yet, despite their victories, Earth remained under siege. Xyrrak warships still dominated orbit, and their forces still held many cities in their iron grip. The enemy had been wounded, but they were not broken. And so, General William Carter made a decision that stunned both allies and enemies alike. Humanity would not just defend itself. It would strike back. The push toward liberation. Within days of their victory, human forces, now armed with newfound confidence, began a series of counteroffensives. The Abrams battalions led the charge, rolling through occupied territories and cutting down alien forces that once seemed invincible. Cities that had been lost to the invasion began to rise again, their people rallying behind the war machines that had turned the tide. Resistance fighters, once scattered and desperate, now fought with renewed purpose, coordinating with military forces to ambush Xyrrak patrols and sabotage supply lines. In the shattered ruins of Paris, an Abrams tank named Steel Rain plowed through a line of Xyrrak infantry, its coaxial machine gun tearing into their formations. The alien troops had once marched through the city with confidence. Now they fled in terror. Across the globe, human weapons, once dismissed as obsolete, proved their worth over and over again. But the real test was yet to come. The trap for the fleet. Despite their victories on the ground, Earth's greatest threat remained in orbit. The Xyrrak fleet, still numbering in the hundreds, could wipe out entire regions with orbital bombardments if provoked. General Carter knew that for humanity to win, they had to do the unthinkable, take the fight to the enemy in space. But first, they had to lure the fleet into a trap. The plan was bold, reckless, and utterly human. Using hacked Xyrrak communication channels, Earth's forces sent out a false distress signal from a military base in the Rocky Mountains, broadcasting that it was the last command center of human resistance. The bait was set. High Lord Xalvok, humiliated by his repeated failures, seized the opportunity. Dispatch the fleet. Wipe them out. I want nothing left. As hundreds of Xyrrak warships descended into low orbit, preparing for a final, devastating strike, they never saw the counterattack coming. The fall of the Xyrrak fleet. The moment the alien fleet moved into position, humanity sprang its trap. From hidden missile silos deep underground, humanity launched a barrage of ICBMs, each one modified with kinetic rods. Massive tungsten projectiles designed to tear through even the strongest armor. The Xyrrak fleet, expecting a desperate last stand, was instead met with destruction. One by one, their ships were torn apart, their hulls shattered by high-speed impacts that bypassed their energy shields entirely. The very physics they had underestimated, the sheer force of kinetic energy, was now their doom. The few remaining Xyrrak ships tried to retreat, but humanity wasn't done yet. From hidden air bases, experimental fighter squadrons, heavily modified F-22s and F-35s, equipped with railguns and anti-ship missiles, soared into the sky, chasing down the retreating invaders. Sergeant David Jackson, now leading a special armored task force, watched as flaming wreckage rained down from the sky, marking the fall of the once invincible Xyrrak fleet. For the first time in the war, Earth's sky was free, taking the fight to the enemy. With the Xyrrak fleet crippled, the war was no longer just about survival. It was about revenge. General Carter stood before a room of world leaders and military officials. On the screen behind him was the Xyrrak homeworld, a dark and imposing planet that had never known fear. "These invaders came to our world believing they could destroy us," Carter said, his voice cold and unyielding. "Now, we bring the war to them." A stunned silence followed. The idea of attacking an empire that had ruled for centuries seemed impossible just weeks ago. But now, humanity had proven that it could fight, that it could win. One by one, the leaders of Earth nodded in agreement. Final preparations. The remaining Abrams battalions were loaded onto massive transport carriers, retrofitted for deep space operations. Pilots trained relentlessly in zero-gravity combat. Engineers modified tanks for extraterrestrial conditions, ensuring that humanity's greatest war machines could roll across alien soil. As he sat atop Iron Fist, Sergeant Jackson looked up at the night sky, now free of Xyrrak ships. "We're really doing this," Mills muttered. Jackson smirked. "Damn right we are." Across the world, the final preparations were made. The invasion fleet was assembled. The once mocked Abrams tanks were now leading the charge, not just for Earth's defense, but for the annihilation of the Xyrrak Dominion itself. For the first time in history, humanity was not just fighting for survival. It was fighting for total victory.